Let's start today's video with Laurel K. Hamilton's line. Stupidity isn't punishable by death. If it was, there would be a hell of a population drop. But the real question is, why are people stupid? And more importantly, when does stupidity become dangerous? I've written on this topic many times, and every time I think I've finally said everything, something in me stays unsatisfied. Because stupidity isn't simple. It has layers, depths, levels. So today, I'm breaking down the 7 levels of stupidity, from harmless ignorance all the way to the kind of stupidity that destroys relationships, societies, and sometimes entire civilizations. And who knows, while watching this, a part of the mind might wonder, which level do I fall into? So let's get into it. Real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance. Passive ignorance is the most innocent, almost harmless form of stupidity. It is simply not knowing, the state every human begins in. A child unaware of mathematics, or an adult unfamiliar with another culture's customs, isn't malicious or stubborn. They just lack information. And as Boris Kruger notes, ignorance can be remedied by learning, error corrected by recognition. It is a gap that experience, education, or curiosity can easily fill. This is why this level is forgivable. Socrates built an entire philosophy around the humility of admitting one's limits, famously claiming to know only that he knows nothing. That awareness, not arrogance, is what separates harmless ignorance from deeper, more dangerous forms of stupidity. Bertrand Russell echoed this in History of Western Philosophy, writing that men are born ignorant, not stupid. Though he wryly added that poor education can turn that ignorance into something worse. Yet even this softest form of stupidity carries a subtle risk, the danger of staying ignorant. Not because the person rejects truth, but because they never bother seeking it. A simple health myth left unexamined, or a financial misconception never questioned, can grow into poor decisions that could have been avoided with a few minutes of honest inquiry. Even Martin Luther King Jr. distinguished between sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity, placing honest unawareness at the lower, less dangerous end of the spectrum. It can cause harm, but it lacks the intent that makes higher levels so destructive. The greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance. It is the illusion of knowledge. Confident misunderstanding is ignorance wearing armor. It occurs when someone not only holds a wrong belief, but defends it with absolute certainty. This is the classic Dunning-Kruger zone. The less one knows, the more convinced one becomes of their own expertise. Picture someone who has never studied economics warning others about market crashes, or a student firmly insisting on the wrong answer. They're mistaken, but absolutely sure they're right. David Dunning and Justin Kruger described this bias in 1999. Though its roots go back to Darwin's observation that ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. Modern commentators echo this. When someone is really stupid, it's impossible for them to realize it. Scientific analysis shows the same pattern. Those with the least skill consistently overestimate their abilities. This level becomes hazardous because confidence amplifies error. A confused person who knows they might be wrong can be guided. One who trusts only themselves misleads anyone who listens. Confidence gets mistaken for competence, especially in politics, journalism, or social media. A single misunderstanding stated boldly spreads faster than careful truth. At this stage, a psychological blindness emerges. Kruger notes that stupidity often thrives in the presence of facts, cloaked in confidence, immune to correction. Confident misunderstanding is the early form of that blindness. The person isn't just uninformed. They believe they've already learned enough. Evidence becomes an inconvenience. Their certainty blocks growth. Philosophers have long warned about this fusion of arrogance and ignorance. Aristotle saw foolishness not as lack of intelligence, but as failure of character and judgment, the pride that resists correction. Someone in this state thinks their view is complete. They can even persuade themselves using flawed logic, then cling to it because admitting error feels like humiliation. This level is the threshold between harmless error and active stubbornness. The moment someone doubles down on a false belief, they become dangerous. We don't see things as they are. We see them as we are. Emotional reasoning marks the point where feelings become the filter for reality. At this stage, a person treats inner emotion as external proof. This concept comes directly from cognitive therapy. Aaron Beck identified it as a core distortion in the 1970s. The pattern is simple, but deceptive. I feel it, therefore it must be true. Guilt becomes evidence of wrongdoing. Fear becomes evidence of danger. The emotion replaces the fact. Psychologist Leon F. Seltzer describes emotional reasoning as concluding that one's emotional reaction defines reality. Evidence that contradicts the feeling gets dismissed automatically. As Seltzer notes, observed evidence is disregarded or dismissed in favor of the assumed truth of one's feelings. A single mistake triggers the feeling of stupidity, and suddenly the person believes they are stupid. A moment of anger toward a coworker convinces them the coworker must have malicious intentions. What separates this level from simple misunderstanding is that the emotional reasoner often knows the facts, but refuses to accept them. They are aware that others see things differently, yet the emotion in them feels stronger than logic. Reality becomes distorted through an internal storm. This level is dangerous because emotions are powerful drivers of behavior. Emotion-based beliefs lead to emotional actions. In relationships, this can spiral quickly. I feel neglected, so I know I'm unloved. From there comes jealousy, accusations, or withdrawal, all based on a feeling rather than evidence. In politics, emotional interpretations, I feel threatened, so they must be a threat, fuel prejudice and extremist thinking. Emotional reasoning turns subjective reaction into absolute certainty. This stage is often reinforced by cognitive biases. Confirmation bias strengthens the loop. Only facts that support the emotion get noticed. A sad mind recalls only failures. A proud mind recalls only victories. Everything else disappears. Feeling becomes filter, and filter becomes worldview. This level is far more hazardous than ordinary misunderstanding because it's not built on faulty logic. It's built on emotional impulse. Emotions can provoke extreme reactions: panic, rage, despair, impulsive decisions. When groups fall into emotional reasoning, the result is mass hysteria, outrage cycles, and moral panics. A feeling of threat transforms into collective fear long before anyone checks the facts. This level marks the turning point in the descent. Logic still exists, but it has been dethroned. From here onward, the ego begins to dominate perception, and the next stages grow darker and more destructive. The eye sees only what the mind is prepared to acknowledge. Unlike simple error or emotional distortion, this level involves a deliberate turning away from truth. The person may sense the reality, may even have been directly informed of it, yet chooses to ignore it because acknowledging it would be painful, inconvenient, or threatening. The term gained prominence through Margaret Heffernan, whose book, Willful Blindness, Why We Ignore the Obvious at Our Peril, argues, you cannot fix a problem that you refuse to acknowledge. It is the perfect description of this trap. Problems grow not because they are invisible, but because people actively avoid facing them. Willful blindness often springs from fear, comfort, or self-protection. A manager who notices a toxic employee may pretend nothing is wrong to avoid conflict or shield their own reputation. A government official might dismiss warnings of collapse because facing them would require unpopular action. Many prefer the safety of illusion over the discomfort of truth. As a result, small cracks become catastrophic failures, while everyone maintains the fiction that everything is fine. Heffernan captures the scope of this danger. The biggest threats we face are the ones we don't see, not because they're invisible, but because we choose to be willfully blind to them. Corporate scandals often grow from this exact dynamic. employees whispering about misconduct while leadership pretends not to hear. Classic psychological studies illustrate the same phenomenon. In the Milgram obedience experiment and the Stanford prison experiment, participants recognized something was wrong, yet complied anyway. As Boris Kruger observes, people can become instruments of harm not out of evil, but out of blind submission to authority. What makes this level uniquely destructive is the transition from passive ignorance to deliberate denial. The walls erected here are intentional. Excuses, deflections, self-comforting narratives. It's not my responsibility. Someone else will fix it. If I don't look at it, maybe it will go away. These rationalizations form a shield, protecting the person from discomfort while simultaneously allowing danger to grow unchecked. This form of stupidity often scales beyond individuals and infects systems. Choosing not to know often becomes the catalyst for tragedy. Escaping willful blindness usually requires an external shock, a whistleblower, a crisis, a confrontation. Only when the protective wall cracks does truth return to view. Heffernan's warning remains the heart of this level. Nothing improves until it is acknowledged. Where all think alike, no one thinks very much. At the fifth stage, stupidity stops being an individual flaw and becomes a collective force. Herd stupidity arises when people abandon independent thought and follow the crowd, even when the crowd is clearly wrong. It is willful blindness multiplied, confident misunderstanding reinforced, and emotional reasoning echoed back by hundreds of voices. The psychologist Solomon Asch demonstrated this with startling clarity. In his famous conformity experiments, participants were asked to identify which line matched a reference line. When everyone else in the room deliberately gave the wrong answer, about 75% of participants conformed at least once, despite seeing the obvious truth. The pressure of the group overpowered their own perception. Many admitted later that they knew the group was wrong, yet feared standing out. Others began doubting their own senses. This dynamic was recognized long before modern psychology. In the 19th century, Charles Mackay described the mass irrationality of crowds in extraordinary popular delusions and the madness of crowds. Men think in herds, they go mad in herds, while they only recover their senses slowly and one by one. His observation captures the essence of herd stupidity. Even intelligent individuals lose clarity when swept into collective momentum. Herd stupidity is dangerous because of its scale. A single person's mistake is small. A crowd's mistake is catastrophic. History is full of examples. Financial bubbles fed by mass enthusiasm, political movements powered by slogans rather than substance, riots escalated by collective adrenaline, or panic buying triggered by a whisper of shortage. When masses move together, rationality becomes optional, and consequences multiply. This level becomes even more toxic when combined with earlier forms of stupidity. Emotional reasoning spreads rapidly in crowds, turning one person's fear into collective hysteria. The result is mass decision-making distorted by shared delusion, and that can lead to war, persecution, economic collapse, or widespread social dysfunction. Even brilliant individuals are vulnerable. As Mackay suggested, herd madness engulfs almost everyone until dissenters begin to break the spell. Independent thought requires courage. Conformity requires only silence. And groupthink thrives when silence becomes the norm. We arrive at intellectual arrogance, when stupidity stops being accidental and becomes a mindset. This isn't just being wrong, this is being proud of being wrong. It's the belief that all answers are already known, that no further learning is necessary, and that every opposing view is beneath consideration. At this stage, stupidity is not passive anymore. It actively shuts down inquiry. This kind of arrogance often dresses itself up as confidence or wisdom. Erasmus described it perfectly when he mocked the learned man who cloaks his ignorance in robes of authority. In The Praise of Folly, he showed how a scholar can appear brilliant while being utterly clueless, simply by hiding behind academic pretension. What made it dangerous, he said, wasn't the wrongness. It was the self-satisfaction, the refusal to be corrected. Aristotle also warned about this mindset. Even intelligent people can collapse into bad reasoning when pride takes over. In real life, intellectual arrogance looks like pure refusal. We already discussed this. I don't care about that source. Everyone who disagrees is ignorant. It's the belief that knowledge has an endpoint, their endpoint. Often it grows from earlier levels. Someone who was willfully blind now convinces themselves that their blindness was wisdom all along. Or someone guided by emotions weaponizes their certainty. How dare anyone question me? Doesn't the strength of my conviction prove I'm right? The damage this causes is enormous. Earlier levels still allow correction, but arrogance builds a fortress around beliefs, brick by brick. Critics are dismissed, evidence is twisted, and warnings are ignored. This is why many thinkers have argued that intellectual arrogance sits at the root of countless disasters. Martin Luther King Jr.'s warning, "Nothing in the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity," captures this perfectly. The danger isn't just in not knowing. The danger is in choosing not to know and being proud of it. This is where ignorance and arrogance fuse with something far more sinister: ill will. It appears when individuals or systems cause harm not just by accident, but through a toxic blend of false certainty, blindness to reality, and a willingness to inflict damage. At this level, harm is done with conviction. Cruelty is justified by a false cause. Reckless decisions are defended by warped logic. The person is not simply mistaken. They believe their harmful actions are righteous, necessary, or deserved. Bonhoeffer drew the line between malice and stupidity long ago. The malicious person knows they are doing evil. The stupid person cannot even recognize the suffering they cause. But here, the boundary blurs. Malicious stupidity is a hybrid, a person acting from ignorance, yet weaponizing it with confidence and hostility. They strike out at others with the arrogant belief that their false worldview makes them heroic. Bonhoeffer warned that the stupid person becomes dangerous by going on the attack. This is exactly what happens at the final level. Think of an extremist committing violence because of a conspiracy they believe is holy truth. Think of a leader spreading destructive propaganda, genuinely thinking it serves a greater good. Martin Luther King Jr. called this conscientious stupidity, the kind that hides behind duty, truth, or moral cause. At this level, mistakes turn into moral crimes. A lie becomes a mission. And the person committing harm genuinely believes they're doing something noble. Pure malice at least knows it is evil. Malicious stupidity believes it is good, and that makes it far more unpredictable and far more destructive. And when this level of stupidity captures institutions, governments, armies, corporations, religious movements, the consequences can shake entire civilizations: wars, genocides, oppression, collapses. This final stage is not just dangerous, it is capable of tearing societies apart. And that leads to the final truth of this entire journey. Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity.